When they finally captured the most hated man in England, his end was designed to be a spectacle of pure vengeance. The 14th century chronicler Jean Froissart tells us he was tied to a ladder, and while still conscious, his genitals were sliced from his body and burned in a fire right before his eyes. His entrails were then slowly pulled from his abdomen, and finally, his still beating heart was cut from his chest and thrown into the same fire because, as the story goes, it had been false and traitorous. But the final insult, the one that would echo in whispers for centuries, wasn't the executioner's blade. It was the gravedigger's shovel. Legend says that this man, this titan of power and greed, was ignominiously buried under the very castle he had built as a monument to his own glory. A final, crushing humiliation. This is the story of Hugh Despenser the Younger. Now, let's be clear on one point. He was never officially a duke. He was a baron, a lord, the king's royal chamberlain. But in the 1320s, his power dwarfed that of any duke in the realm. He was the King of England in all but name, a man who built an empire through sheer, terrifying ambition. The story of the Duke buried under his castle is a legend, but like all powerful legends, it exists for a reason. While whispers of his burial spot spread, no credible historical source ever claimed he was buried alive. That detail was likely added later, a story born from the pure, incandescent hatred of an entire kingdom for one man. So, how did he climb so high? And what sins did he commit that his fall wouldn't just be spectacular, but would become the stuff of dark folklore? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, to a friendship that would bring a nation to its knees. In the early 14th century, England was a kingdom on a knife's edge. At its head was King Edward II, a man who was, to put it mildly, not cut out for the job. He wasn't his father, the formidable Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots. Edward II was a man who craved affection and hated the grim duties of kingship. He wanted friends, not advisors, and in the cutthroat world of the medieval court, this need was a fatal flaw. The barons of England watched with growing fury as the king lavished power upon his chosen favorites, first a Gascon knight named Piers Gaveston. His closeness to the king scandalized the court and led to his execution at the hands of resentful nobles in 1312. Into this vacuum of power and affection stepped Hugh Despenser the Younger. Born around 1287, he was of noble blood, but not from the top tier. His real inheritance was a relentless, burning ambition. His path to the top was paved with a single, brilliant move. In 1306, he married Eleanor de Clare. She wasn't just any noblewoman, she was the king's own niece. This marriage put Despenser in the royal orbit, but it was a tragedy that would catapult him from a minor courtier into a major player. In 1314, Eleanor's brother was killed at the disastrous Battle of Bannockburn. With no male heir, the vast and wealthy Gloucester inheritance was split between his three sisters. Just like that, Hugh Despenser, through his wife, became one of the richest men in the country. Wealth was one thing, but Despenser craved what really mattered: proximity to the king. By 1318, he had maneuvered his way into the position of royal chamberlain. This was no desk job. The chamberlain controlled all access to the king. Every meeting, every whisper in the royal ear now had to go through Hugh Despenser. He started to build a relationship with Edward II that looked suspiciously like the king's earlier bond with Gaveston. He understood what Edward wanted, not a servant, but a friend, not a critic, but a confidant who would back his every decision and shield him from the boring work of being a king. The barons, who had literally killed to remove one favorite, now watched in horror as a new one, far more cunning and greedy, took his place. They saw Despenser as a poison seeping into the heart of the monarchy. According to his enemies, he played on the king's weaknesses like a master musician, isolating him from his traditional counselors, his family, and most dangerously, from his own queen. This wasn't just a friendship, it was a hostile takeover, and the prize was the kingdom of England itself. From 1322 on, the power of Hugh Despenser and his father, Hugh Despenser the Elder, was absolute. After crushing a rebellion at the Battle of Boroughbridge, their rivals were either dead or in exile. The floodgates of their greed were thrown open, and they began to build a personal empire with a speed that shocked even the most cynical nobles. Hugh the Younger was the architect of this regime, a man driven by an insatiable hunger for land. His methods were a masterclass in abusing power. Using his control over the king, he systematically stripped his rivals of their property. The Welsh marches, a patchwork of lordships, became his personal hunting ground. He strong-armed his brother-in-law, Hugh de Audley, into trading valuable Welsh lands for less valuable English ones. He cheated another sister-in-law, Elizabeth de Clare, out of her inheritance. He was accused of locking up a noblewoman, Lady Barrett, until she signed away her estates. This wasn't politics, it was extortion on a national scale, all backed by the king's authority. Together, father and son became the rulers of England in all but name. They controlled the treasury, handing out royal favor to friends and financial ruin to enemies. They twisted the legal system to justify their land grabs, making sure no court in the land would dare rule against them. The word was, no one, no matter how powerful, could get a hearing from the king without first lining the Despensers' pockets. They weren't just corrupt, they were innovators in corruption, creating a system so suffocating that it bred a unique and venomous hatred. And no one hated Hugh Despenser more than Queen Isabella. Later known as the She-Wolf of France, she was a proud and intelligent woman, the daughter of a French king. She had watched as this upstart baron stole her influence and her husband's affection. Despenser made no secret of his contempt for her, sidelining her at court and, according to some accounts, even restricting her access to her own children. He treated the Queen of England as just another obstacle. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. He had stolen land from barons and extorted money from merchants, creating a long list of enemies. But in alienating Isabella, he had created an avenger. He saw her as a spurned wife he could safely ignore. He completely failed to see the formidable political operator lurking beneath the surface, a woman who was biding her time, gathering all the threads of resentment from across the kingdom, just waiting for the perfect moment to weave them into a hangman's noose. The Despensers, at the very peak of their power, blinded by success, had no idea their entire empire was about to be washed away by a tide of pure vengeance. The beginning of the end came in 1325, disguised as diplomacy. A dispute over English land in France needed a negotiator, and Queen Isabella, a French princess, was the obvious choice. Despenser and the king saw it as a great way to get the troublesome queen out of the country for a while. They eagerly sent her to Paris to negotiate with her brother, King Charles IV. It was the single greatest mistake of Despenser's life. Once in France, on her home turf and free from Despenser's control, Isabella made a stunning move. She refused to come back. She announced she would not return to England until the hateful Despensers were gone. Her defiance became a rallying cry for all of Edward II's exiled enemies. And the most formidable of them was already in Paris, Roger Mortimer. Mortimer was a powerful lord who had led the failed rebellion in 1322. Despenser had taken his lands and thrown him in the Tower of London, but Mortimer had pulled off a near-impossible escape in 1323 and fled to France. He and Despenser hated each other with a passion. In Paris, he and Isabella found common cause. Their political alliance quickly blossomed into a personal one. They became lovers, united by their shared ambition and their desire for revenge. From Paris, the news must have seemed like a distant storm to Despenser. He was the undisputed master of England. What could a disgraced queen and a fugitive lord possibly do from across the Channel? He grew more arrogant, more tyrannical, completely underestimating the threat. Meanwhile, Isabella and Mortimer were planning an invasion. They used her son, the young Prince Edward, as a political pawn, arranging his marriage to the daughter of a powerful count in exchange for ships and a small mercenary army. In September 1326, the storm broke. Isabella and Mortimer landed in Suffolk. What happened next revealed just how deeply the Despensers were hated. The kingdom didn't rally to its king. Instead, nobles, knights, and commoners flocked to Isabella's banner. The country rose up not for its king, but against his favorite. The regime that Despenser had built, which seemed so untouchable, crumbled in a matter of weeks. The collapse was total and terrifyingly fast. London erupted into mob rule, forcing the king and Despenser to flee. They ran west towards the Despenser heartlands in Wales, hoping to raise an army. But there was no one left to rally. They were hunted fugitives in a kingdom that had turned on them completely. For weeks they were on the run, trying to find a ship to escape, but even the weather seemed to be against them, with storms driving them back to shore. On November 16, 1326, near Llantrisant in South Wales, they were finally caught. King Edward II, a broken man, was taken away, and Hugh Despenser the Younger, the man who had ruled a nation, was now a prisoner, destined to face the woman he had scorned and the enemies he had so foolishly created. His spectacular rise was over. His downfall would be even more so. Hugh Despenser's final days were a carefully staged pageant of agony, designed not just to kill him, but to obliterate his memory in a show of state-sanctioned brutality. He was taken to Hereford, where Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer waited. He reportedly tried to starve himself to death before his trial, but he was denied even that small measure of control. His trial on November 24, 1326, was pure political theater. There was no defense, and there would be no mercy. He was dragged before his mortal enemies and read a long list of charges: high treason, robbing the church, extortion, piracy, and turning the king against the queen. One account claims his captors crowned him with nettles and scrawled Bible verses about arrogance and greed onto his skin. He was found guilty on all counts. The sentence was the traitor's death, hanging, drawing, and quartering, but with a few unique touches to match the scale of his crimes. He was roped to 4 horses and dragged naked through the streets of Hereford. On the edge of the city, enormous gallows had been built, 50 feet high, some said, so everyone could witness the fate of a tyrant. Here, the chronicler Jean Froissart, writing decades after the event, gives us the most vivid and stomach-turning account. Despenser was hanged, but cut down while still alive. Strapped to a ladder, he watched as an executioner stepped forward with a knife. Before the crowd, which included Isabella and Mortimer, he was publicly castrated, his severed genitals thrown into a bonfire. Then, the executioner sliced open his abdomen. While Despenser was still conscious, his entrails were slowly pulled out and also cast into the flames. Finally, his heart, his false and traitorous heart, was cut from his chest, and his torment was over. Even in death, the vengeance wasn't complete. His body was beheaded. His head was sent to be displayed on a spike on London Bridge, a grisly warning. The rest of his body was carved into 4 pieces, which were then sent to the 4 corners of England, Bristol, Dover, York, and Carlisle, to be put on public display. It was a final statement that the Despenser regime was not just over, but had been utterly annihilated. Hugh Despenser was dead, his body dismembered, and his power destroyed. But the hatred for him ran so deep, it needed a final poetic injustice, a story to capture the totality of his fall. And so, the legend was born, that he was buried in shame beneath one of his own castles, his monument to power becoming his tomb. It's a powerful myth, but the true story of what happened to his remains is a far more complex and fascinating mystery. For 4 years, the pieces of Hugh Despenser's body rotted on city gates across England. In December 1330, after the young King Edward III had seized power from his mother Isabella and her lover Roger Mortimer, Despenser's widow, Eleanor, was finally given permission to collect what was left of her husband for a proper burial. What she received was a testament to the savagery of his end: just his head, a single thigh bone, and a few vertebrae. These scant remains were taken to the magnificent Tewkesbury Abbey, the traditional burial place of his wife's powerful family. A tomb was built, and what little was left of the man who once ruled England was laid to rest. For nearly 650 years, That was where the story ended. Then, in the 1970s, an archaeological dig at the ruins of Hulton Abbey in Staffordshire, about 100 miles north of Tewkesbury, unearthed a shocking discovery: a grave containing the remains of a man who had clearly met a violent end. The skeleton had been decapitated and chopped into several pieces with a sharp blade. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains in the right time period, and analysis suggested the man was over 34. Despenser was around 39. For decades, the remains were a puzzle. But in 2008, Dr. Mary Lewis of the University of Reading put forward a stunning theory. She argued the skeleton could very well be that of Hugh Despenser the Younger. The evidence was compelling. Not only did the brutalized skeleton match the known facts of his execution, but the specific bones missing from the Hulton Abbey skeleton, the head, a thigh bone, and several vertebrae, were the exact same ones known to have been buried at Tewkesbury Abbey. While it's a tantalizing case, the identification remains a fascinating historical debate, not a settled fact. This leaves us with a great historical puzzle. Why would a part of him be buried here? Hulton Abbey was on land owned by his brother-in-law, Hugh de Audley, a man Despenser had swindled. Was this a secret, second burial by friends? Or was it a final insult from his enemies, burying his desecrated remains on the land of a man he had wronged? His body, scattered first by his executioners and perhaps later by friends or foes, remains a mystery. He wasn't buried under his castle, but he may have been buried in two separate graves, a fragmented end for a man who tore a kingdom apart. In the end, Hugh Despenser's story is a chilling lesson in the intoxicating poison of power. He was a man of immense talent and limitless ambition who clawed his way to the very top, only to be consumed by his own greed. He was never officially a duke, but the title that legend gave him speaks to a greater truth. For a few short, terrifying years, his power was absolute. He was the favorite who became a tyrant, the friend who became a predator, and the man who became so hated that his death had to be a masterpiece of vengeance. He wasn't buried alive under his castle, a fate perhaps too simple for such a complex villain. Instead, his legacy is something far more haunting: a scattered corpse, a tomb in Tewkesbury holding just a handful of bones, and another potential grave 100 miles away, leaving a trail of questions that still linger 700 years later. His story forces us to look at the brutal nature of medieval justice and the fascinating way that history and legend can twist together over time. What do you think is the truth behind the Hulton Abbey remains? A secret burial by loyal friends, or one last act of vengeance by his enemies? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of power, greed, and a truly spectacular downfall, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories from the dark corners of history. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Thanks for watching.